The stars had always been quiet for humanity. For 300 years, they had explored the darkness between worlds and found nothing but empty planets and dead moons. They had met a few species along the way. Some were friendly and traded knowledge across the void. Some were hostile and had to be pushed back. But none of them had ever made humanity truly afraid. None of them had ever threatened the existence of the human race. That changed on a cold October morning in the year 2347, when the sky above, earth filled with shadows, the Valrath Dominion arrived without warning. Their fleet came through a fold in space near the orbit of Mars. 300 warships appeared in a single moment, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. The smallest of their vessels was the size of a mountain. The largest, the flagship of their fleet, was the size of a small moon. It blocked out the sun when it passed between Earth and the distant star that had given life to humanity. High Commander Zereth stood on the bridge of that flagship. He was tall even by the standards of his species, standing nearly 10 feet from the ground to the top of his armored skull. His skin was dark gray and thick like stone. 4 yellow eyes sat in his angular face, each one cold and ancient like a dying star. He had conquered 17 star systems in his lifetime. He had watched entire civilizations fall to their knees before him without firing a single shot. He expected nothing different from the small blue world that now filled his view screen. The Velrath were born on a world of high gravity and endless violence. Every creature on their home planet was a predator. There was no concept of peace in their history. There was only strength and weakness. The strong took what they wanted. The weak gave what was demanded. This was the natural order of things. This was the only truth the Velrath had ever known across 10,000 years of conquest. Zereth looked at Earth and saw another weak species waiting to be harvested. His scouts had studied humanity for months before the invasion. They had watched their cities from orbit and counted their ships. They had measured their weapons and found them primitive compared to the might of the Dominion. The humans had a small fleet of warships, perhaps 50 vessels at most. They had defense platforms around their planet and their moon. None of it would matter against 300 Velrath warships armed with weapons that could crack a planet in half. The High Commander turned to his communications officer and gave the order. A message was sent to Earth. It was the same message the Velrath had sent to every world they had conquered. It was simple and direct because the Velrath did not believe in wasted words or empty threats. Admiral Lisa Morgan was drinking coffee in her office when the transmission arrived. She was 53 years old, with gray hair that she kept pulled back in a tight knot behind her head. Her face was lined with years of service and sacrifice. Her eyes were the color of steel and just as hard. She had commanded Earth Defense Command for 7 years. She had overseen the protection of humanity through minor skirmishes and border disputes with neighboring species. But she had never faced anything like the fleet that now sat in her sky like a promise of death. She set down her coffee and watched the message play on the screen in front of her. The alien that appeared was massive and terrifying. Its voice was deep and harsh, like rocks grinding together in the depths of a dying world. "You will provide tribute," the alien said. 30% of your planetary resources will be delivered to our vessels. 50 million of your kind will be transported to our labor camps to serve the Dominion. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. Refusal means the complete destruction of your species. You have 12 hours to comply. The message ended. Lisa sat in silence for a long moment. She thought about her daughter who lived in Seattle with her 2 young children. She thought about the billions of people who were going about their daily lives below, unaware that everything was about to change forever. She thought about the weight of the decision that now rested on her shoulders alone. She picked up her communicator and called her senior staff to the command center. The fate of humanity would not be decided by one person. It would be decided by all of them together. Colonel Daniel Price arrived first. He was a tall man in his 40s, with broad shoulders and a square jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He had spent 20 years in tactical operations and knew more about combat strategy than anyone else in the fleet. He watched the message without speaking. His hands curled into fists at his sides as the alien spoke its demands. Dr. Catherine Webb came next. She was the chief xenologist for Earth Defense Command, a small woman with sharp eyes behind thin glasses and a mind that never stopped working. She had dedicated her entire life to studying alien species. She had learned their languages and their histories and their weaknesses. She had files on 17 conquered civilizations, and she knew exactly what the Velrath had done to each of them. She watched the message with a look of cold concentration. General Paul Martinez was the last to arrive. He was 61 years old and had commanded Earth's combined military forces for a decade. He walked with a slight limp from an old injury he had received in a battle long ago. His hair was white and his face was weathered by years of hard decisions. But his eyes were still fierce and his voice still carried the weight of absolute authority. They watched the message. Together in the darkened room, when it finished, the silence stretched out like a living thing. Catherine spoke first. Her voice was calm and measured. I have studied the Velrath for years. They have conquered 17 species across this sector of the galaxy. Every single one of them surrendered without a fight. The Velrath have never faced real resistance. They do not understand it. They do not expect it. To them, conquest is as natural as breathing. Daniel shook his head slowly. Their fleet is massive. 300 ships against our 50. The math does not favor us in a direct confrontation. We would be throwing lives away. Paul stepped forward. His voice was quiet but steady like the foundation of a mountain. I have fought battles where the odds were against us. I have watched soldiers do impossible things when their homes and families were threatened. Numbers are not everything. Will and courage count for something in this universe. Lisa looked at each of them in turn. She saw fear in their eyes, but she also saw something else. She saw determination. She saw the same fire that had driven humanity from the caves to the stars. She thought about the message again. She thought about the word tribute and what it truly meant. 30% of everything they had built across 3 centuries. 50 million people taken from their families and sent to die in alien labor camps. The end of freedom. The end of hope. The end of everything humanity had ever dreamed. She made her decision. We are not going to surrender, she said. We are not going to negotiate. We are not going to give them a single resource or a single life. If they want Earth, they will have to take it from us. And we will make them pay for every inch in blood. Oh. Catherine allowed herself a small smile. Paul straightened his shoulders and looked like a man half his age. Then we have 12 hours to prepare, Paul said. Let us show these creatures what humanity is truly made of. Somewhere out in the darkness between worlds, High Commander Xyrith waited for surrender. He had waited 17 times before, and 17 times he had received exactly what he expected. This time would be different. This time he would receive something no Velrath had ever experienced. He would receive defiance. The 12 hours passed slowly for humanity and quickly for the Velrath. High Commander Xyrith spent that time in quiet meditation aboard his flagship. He thought about the 17 worlds he had brought under the Dominion's control. He remembered how each civilization had sent their surrender within the first few hours. Some had begged, some had wept. Some had tried to negotiate for better terms. All of them had broken in the end. All of them had given everything that was demanded. When the deadline arrived, Xyrith opened his 4 eyes and walked to the bridge of his ship. His officers stood at attention as he took his place in the command chair. The view screen showed Earth hanging in the darkness like a blue jewel. It was a beautiful world. It would make a fine addition to the Dominion's collection. Open a channel, Xyrith commanded. The humans should be ready to submit their tribute protocols by now. The communications officer worked his console and then looked up with confusion in his eyes. High Commander, there is no response from the planet. They have not sent any transmission since our initial message. Xyrith felt a flicker of annoyance. Perhaps these humans were slower than other species. Perhaps they needed more time to organize their surrender. He decided to send another message to remind them of their situation. This is High Commander Xyrith of the Velrath Dominion. Your 12 hours have passed. We await your tribute protocols and the coordinates for resource extraction. Respond immediately or face the consequences of your silence. The response came within moments. It was not what Xyrith expected. The screen flickered and showed a human female with gray hair and hard eyes. She wore a military uniform and stood with perfect stillness. There was no fear in her face. There was no submission in her posture. "This is Admiral Lisa Morgan of Earth Defense Command," she said. "We have received your demands. We have considered them carefully, and we have decided that you can go to hell." The transmission ended. Xyrith stared at the blank screen for a long moment. His officers exchanged nervous glances. No species had ever spoken to the Velroth this way. No species had ever dared. "Perhaps they do not understand their situation," said Thrall, the second in command. He was younger than Xyrith and eager to prove himself in battle. "Perhaps we should demonstrate our power so they know what they face." Xyrith nodded slowly. "Send one ship to their moon. Destroy one of their installations. Let them see what we are capable of. Then they will understand." A single Velrath warship descended from the fleet. It was a cruiser-class vessel, smaller than the flagship, but still large enough to blot out the stars as it moved. Its weapons powered up with a deep humming sound that vibrated through the hull. The target was a human mining facility on the surface of the moon. It would be erased in seconds as a demonstration of Velrath might. The cruiser never fired a shot. From the lunar surface, hidden installations suddenly came to life. Panels slid open to reveal weapons that no Velrath scout had ever detected. Railgun platforms locked onto the approaching vessel. Directed energy weapons powered up in underground bunkers. Missile batteries armed themselves with warheads that glowed with contained antimatter. The first railgun round hit the cruiser at 30 kilometers per second. It punched through the armored hull like a needle through cloth. The second round hit a moment later, tearing through the engine section. The third and fourth rounds struck in rapid succession, ripping the ship apart from the inside. Then the energy weapons fired. Beams of concentrated light cut through what remained of the cruiser, slicing it into burning fragments. The entire attack lasted 11 seconds. When it was over, there was nothing left but debris drifting in the silence of space. Aboard the flagship, Xyrith watched the destruction of his ship with something he had never felt before. It took him a moment to recognize the emotion. It was shock. Pure and complete shock. A Velrath warship had been destroyed by primitives. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And yet it had happened. Thrall stepped forward with wide eyes. "High Commander, our sensors did not detect those weapons. The humans have been hiding their true capabilities from us. They have been preparing for this moment." Xyrith gripped the arms of his command chair until his armored fingers left dents in the metal. He thought about the 17 species he had conquered. None of them had hidden weapons. None of them had prepared secret defenses. None of them had ever thought to fight back against the inevitable. These humans were different. Perhaps Xyrith said slowly, "We should reconsider our approach. Send another message to the human commander. We will offer more reasonable terms." The second transmission was recorded and sent to Earth Defense Command. Admiral Lisa Morgan watched it with her senior staff gathered around her. The alien on the screen looked less confident than before. Its 4 eyes kept darting to the side as if watching for threats. "We acknowledge your defensive capabilities," Xyrith said. "The Velrath Dominion is willing to negotiate more favorable terms for your tribute. A smaller percentage of resources, fewer workers for our labor camps. We can reach an arrangement that benefits both our species." Catherine Webb laughed softly. It was the first time anyone had heard her laugh in years. Look at him. He went from demanding tribute to requesting it. One destroyed ship, and suddenly they want to negotiate. Daniel Price crossed his arms over his chest. "They still have 299 ships out there. We hurt them, but we did not break them. Not yet." General Paul Martinez studied the message with careful eyes. "They are testing us. They want to see if we will take an easier path now that we have shown strength. They hope we will be satisfied with a smaller defeat." Lisa Morgan stepped forward and pressed the button to record her response. Her face was calm. Her voice was steady. She spoke a single word that would echo through history for centuries to come. The transmission ended. In the command center of the flagship, Xerath received the response. One word. Just one word. It was the shortest message any species had ever sent to the Velrath Dominion. It was also the most powerful. No, such a small word. Such a simple concept. And yet it carried the weight of an entire civilization's defiance. It said that humanity would not bend. It said that humanity would not break. It said that if the Velrath wanted Earth, they would have to fight for every inch of it. Xerath stood from his command chair. His 4 eyes burned with cold fury. If these humans wanted war, then war they would have. He would crush their hidden defenses. He would burn their cities. He would teach them the same lesson he had taught 17 other species across the stars. All ships, he commanded, prepare for full assault. We will show these primitives what happens to those who defy the Dominion. The Velrath fleet began to move toward Earth. 300 warships minus 1. Their weapons powered up. Their warriors prepared for battle. They had conquered entire civilizations without losing a single vessel. Surely one lucky shot did not change the fundamental truth of the universe. The strong took from the weak, but humanity had never been weak. They had simply been waiting. The Velrath fleet moved toward Earth like a storm of metal and fire. High Commander Xerath stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the blue planet grow larger on his view screen. He had given the order for full assault. 250 ships would attack Earth, directly, while the remaining 49 would secure the outer planets and cut off any escape routes. The humans had shown their defiance. Now they would learn the cost of that defiance. 50 Velroth warships descended toward the planet in the first wave. They came in a formation that had crushed 17 civilizations before this day. Their shields were raised to maximum power. Their weapons were charged and ready to fire. Each ship carried enough firepower to level a continent. Together they could reduce Earth to a burning cinder in a matter of hours. They never reached the planet, from the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Hidden platforms revealed themselves. They had been disguised as mining operations for 200 years. Generations of human engineers had built them in secret, passing the work from parent to child like a sacred trust. Now those children activated weapons that their great-grandparents had designed. Antimatter. The torpedoes launched from a dozen different directions. They moved faster than the Velrath sensors could track. They struck the first wave of warships with the fury of small suns. Each torpedo that found its target released enough energy to vaporize a mountain. 23 Velroth ships died in the first 30 seconds of the assault. Aboard the flagship, alarms blared and officers shouted, "Reports." Xerath gripped his command chair as the bridge shook from a near miss. His tactical display showed ship after ship winking out of existence. His warriors, who had never known defeat, were dying by the thousands. "Pull back the assault wave," Xerath ordered. "Regroup at safe distance. These humans have more tricks than we anticipated." The surviving ships retreated in disorder. They had expected easy prey. They had found something else entirely. Something that fought back with weapons they had never seen and tactics they could not predict. On Earth, the people watched the battle unfold on screens across the world. Every network carried the same footage. Every channel showed the same images of alien warships exploding in the darkness of space. For the first time in 12 hours, humanity allowed itself to hope. In a small apartment in Chicago, a retired engineer named Frank Howard sat with his granddaughter. She was 7 years old with brown hair and curious eyes. Her name was Megan, and she had been scared since the alien ships first appeared in the sky. She had asked her grandfather 100 questions about what would happen. Now she asked one more. "Grandpa, are we going to win?" Frank looked at the screen where another Velrath ship burst into flames. He thought about all the years he had spent working on the secret defense projects. He thought about the sacrifices his generation had made so that future generations might be safe. He thought about the long chain of human history that stretched back to the caves and forward to the stars. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, "we are going to win. Because that is what humans do. We survive, we fight, and we never give up." Meanwhile, in Earth's Defense Command, Admiral Lisa Morgan was coordinating the next phase of the battle. The hidden asteroid platforms had done their job. The first wave was broken, but there were still over 200 Velroth ships out there, and they would not make the same mistake twice. "Deploy the second fleet," Lisa ordered. "It is time to show them what else we have been hiding." Commander Nathan Cole received the order aboard his carrier vessel. He was a young man of 35 with dark hair and sharp eyes. He had spent his entire career preparing for a battle that many thought would never come. Now that battle was here, and he was ready. His fleet had been hiding behind Jupiter for 3 days. 47 human warships, smaller than the Velrath vessels, but faster and more advanced. They were built with technology that humanity had kept secret from every other species in the galaxy. Engines that could outrun anything the Dominion possessed. Weapons that could punch through the thickest armor. Shields that could deflect the most powerful beams. All ships, Nathan commanded, engage the enemy. Show them what humanity is made of. The human fleet emerged from behind Jupiter like wolves hunting in the darkness. They moved with perfect coordination, each ship knowing exactly where to be and what to do. They hit the Velrath formation from an unexpected angle, tearing into the larger vessels with precision strikes. Dr. Catherine Webb watched the battle data from her station in the command center. She had spent years studying the conquered species of the Velrath Dominion. She had learned their histories and their fates. And she had discovered something that gave her hope. "Every species the Velrath conquered developed in peace," she said to Lisa. "They had no concept of war. They did not know how to fight because they had never needed to learn. When the Dominion arrived, they had no experience with violence on this scale." Lisa nodded slowly. "But humanity is different. We are very different," Catherine agreed. "We evolved through constant conflict. We have been fighting wars since before we could write. Violence is woven into our history like thread in a tapestry. The Velrath think they are predators. They have no idea what a true predator looks like." The battle raged across the solar system. Human ships darted between the massive Velroth cruisers, striking weak points and retreating before the enemy could respond. Velroth commanders screamed orders that their crews could not follow. Their formations broke apart as human tactics shattered their discipline. General Paul commanded the ground defense forces from a bunker beneath the European continent. He had positioned troops at every possible landing zone. He had planted weapons in every city and every field. If the Velrath managed to land soldiers on Earth, they would find a hostile world waiting for them. A young lieutenant approached him with a report. "General, enemy dropships are approaching the northern coast. They intend to establish a beachhead." Paul studied the tactical map. He saw the alien vessels descending through the atmosphere. He saw the path they would take and the place they would land. And he smiled. "Let them land," he said. "Let them think they have gained a foothold. Then show them what happens when you invade human soil." The Velrath dropships touched down on a beach in Norway. Warriors poured out of the vessels, their armored forms moving with predatory grace. They expected terrified civilians and weak resistance. They found neither. Hidden bunkers opened along the cliff tops. Human soldiers emerged with weapons designed specifically to fight the Velrath. The battle was brief and brutal. Within an hour, every alien warrior on that beach was dead. Across the planet, similar scenes played out. Every landing was contested. Every foothold was challenged. The Velrath had conquered 17 worlds without facing true resistance. Now they faced a species that had been fighting wars for 10,000 years, and humanity was just getting started. The battle lasted 3 days. 3 days of fire and blood and sacrifice. 3 days that would be remembered for as long as humanity walked among the stars. The Velrath had never experienced anything like it. They had never faced an enemy that refused to break. They had never fought a species that seemed to grow stronger with every loss. Hi, Commander Zyrith watched his fleet diminish hour by hour. 200 ships on the first day, 150 on the second. 90 by the morning of the third day. His warriors whispered of withdrawal. His officers questioned his strategies. For the first time in his long life, Zyrith did not have answers for them. The humans fought with a fury that bordered on madness. Their pilots flew missions that no sane creature would attempt. Their soldiers held positions long after any reasonable hope of survival had faded. They died by the thousands, but for every human that fell, they took 10 Velrath with them. Lieutenant Commander Amy Garcia was one of those pilots. She was 32 years old, with short black hair and a smile that could light up a room. She had 2 children waiting for her back on Earth, a boy of 8 named Marco and a girl of 5 named Sophia. She had promised them she would come home on the second day of the battle. Her fighter squadron was ordered to intercept a group of Velrath cruisers that had broken through the main defense line. They were heading for the populated cities of South America. Millions of lives hung in the balance. Amy led her squadron into the heart of the enemy formation. They fought with everything they had. One by one, her pilots fell. Their ships exploded around her like dying stars. Soon, only Amy remained, her fighter damaged and her weapons nearly depleted. One cruiser still remained. It was heading for Buenos Aires, for the homes of 12 million people. For children who were just like her own, Marco and Sophia, Amy made her choice. She aimed her fighter at the cruiser's engine section. She pushed her throttle to maximum. The damaged ship screamed around her as it accelerated beyond safe limits. She had 1 torpedo left. One chance to stop the cruiser. Her final transmission was recorded and broadcast across the planet. Her voice was calm and steady despite everything. "Tell my kids I love them. Tell them their mother was brave." The torpedo launched. The fighter followed. Both struck the cruiser's engine core at the same moment. The explosion was visible from Earth's surface. When the light faded, the cruiser was gone. Amy was gone, but Buenos Aires still stood. General Paul Martinez fought on the ground in the European sector. The Velrath had landed a major force in Germany and were pushing toward the population centers. Paul was 61 years old, with a bad leg and white hair. He should have been commanding from a safe bunker far from the front lines. Instead, he stood in a trench with soldiers who were young enough to be his grandchildren. He held a rifle in his hands and fired at the advancing alien warriors alongside them. When asked why he did not command from safety, his answer was simple. A general who will not fight beside his soldiers does not deserve to command them. These young people are willing to die for their world. The least I can do is stand with them. The Velrath warriors were massive and heavily armored. Their skin could deflect most projectile weapons. They seemed almost invincible as they advanced across the battlefield. But Paul and his soldiers held their ground. They fought for every meter of Earth. They made the Velrath pay for every step forward. The turning point came on the 3rd day. Dr. Catherine Webb had been working without sleep since the battle began. She had studied everything humanity knew about the Velrath. She had analyzed their biology, their technology, their history, and she had found a weakness. The armored skin of the Velrath was resistant to physical impacts. Bullets and shrapnel bounced off them like rain off stone. But their bodies had evolved on a world with a specific range of sounds. Certain frequencies were painful to them. Certain frequencies could cripple them entirely. Catherine brought her discovery to Admiral Lisa Morgan at 3 in the morning on the 3rd day. "Sonic weapons," Catherine said. "Their armor means nothing against sound. We can build emitters that will broadcast frequencies that disrupt their nervous systems. They will not be able to fight. They will not even be able to stand." Lisa looked at the data. She looked at the exhaustion on Catherine's face. She looked at the tactical displays showing the dwindling number of both human and Velrath forces. "How long to build these weapons?" "Engineers are already working on prototypes. We can have them deployed within 6 hours. Do it." The sonic emitters were rushed to every front line on the planet. They were mounted on vehicles and carried by soldiers and installed in defensive positions. When the Velrath launched their next assault, they were met with a sound they could not endure. The effect was devastating. Velrath warriors collapsed to the ground, clutching their heads in agony. Their armored bodies, so resistant to bullets and blades, offered no protection against the invisible waves of sound that tore through them. Their ground assault fell apart within hours. Aboard the flagship, High Commander Zereth received reports of the disaster. His forces on Earth were being slaughtered. His fleet in orbit was being picked apart by human ships that moved like ghosts in the darkness. Everything he had built across a lifetime of conquest was crumbling around him, for the first time in his existence. Zirith felt true fear. It was a cold sensation that crawled through his body like ice water in his veins. He had thought the Velrath were the ultimate predators in the galaxy. He had thought nothing could stand against them. He had been wrong. These humans were something else entirely. They were a species forged in the fires of constant war. They did not surrender when the odds were against them. They did not break when faced with overwhelming force. They fought harder. They grew stronger. They found ways to win that should have been impossible. Zirith looked at his tactical display. 43 ships remained from his once mighty fleet. 43 ships against an enemy that seemed to have no limit to its courage or its rage. The mathematics of the situation were clear. The Velrath could not win this war. They could only choose how much more they were willing to lose. The High Commander made his decision. For the first time in the history of the Velrath Dominion, he would request terms from an enemy. He would admit that the strong were not always victorious. He would acknowledge that some prey was too dangerous to hunt. He ordered his communications officer to open a channel to Earth. Defense Command. The time had come to speak of surrender. The transmission from the Velrath flagship arrived. At Earth Defense Command at sunset on the third day, Admiral Lisa Morgan stood in the center of the room, surrounded by her officers. They were all exhausted. They had not slept in days. They had watched friends die and cities burn, but they had not broken. They had not surrendered. And now they were about to receive a message that no human had ever heard before. Hi, Commander Zirith appeared on the main view screen. He looked different than he had 3 days ago. The arrogance was gone from his 4 yellow eyes. The certainty was gone from his posture. He stood before them as something the Velrath had never been. He stood before them as the defeated. I request communication with your leader, Zirith said. His voice was still deep and harsh, but there was something else in it now. Something that sounded almost like respect. I wish to discuss terms. Lisa stepped forward. She was bruised and tired. Her uniform was wrinkled and stained. She had not left the command center in over 60 hours. But her eyes were still sharp, and her spine was still straight. I am Admiral Lisa Morgan. I speak for Earth. What terms do you wish to discuss? Zirith lowered his massive head. It was the closest thing to a bow that his species could manage. We withdraw our request for tribute. The Velrath Dominion acknowledges that Earth and its people are not suitable targets for conquest. We ask only for safe passage out of your system. Allow us to leave and we will never return. The room was silent. Colonel Daniel Price stood with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Dr. Catherine Webb watched the alien with the same analytical gaze she had used to find his species' weakness. General Paul Martinez had returned from the front lines with his arm in a sling and dirt on his uniform. But he stood tall beside his fellow officers. Lisa considered the request. She thought about the thousands of human soldiers who had died in the last 3 days. She thought about Amy Garcia and her final message to her children. She thought about all the men and women who had given everything to stop this invasion, and she thought about something else. She thought about the 17 species that the Velrath had conquered. She thought about the billions of sentient beings who lived under Dominion rule as slaves. She thought about worlds that had surrendered because they had no choice, because they had never known war, because they had never learned to fight. No, Lisa said. Zirith's 4 eyes widened. No, you refuse to let us leave. I refuse to let you leave with everything you have stolen. Lisa took another step toward the screen. Her voice was cold and hard as iron. You came to our home. You threatened our children. You killed our people. And now you ask to simply leave? As if nothing happened? As if we should just forget. What would you have of us? Zirith asked. There was genuine confusion in his voice. No species had ever demanded anything from the Velrath before. Your dominion has conquered 17 star systems. 17 species live under your rule as slaves. That ends today. Lisa's voice grew stronger with each word. You will release every conquered world. You will dismantle your war fleet. You will answer for what you have done across 100 years of conquest. Those are our terms. Xyreth stared at her. And if we refuse? Lisa smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. Then we will hunt you across the galaxy. We will find every world you have touched, and we will free it. We will tear down everything your dominion has built over the centuries. We responded to your demand for tribute with one word. Now I'll give you another word. The only word that matters. She paused. The silence stretched across the void between the flagship and Earth. Surrender. Xyreth closed his 4 eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. The weight of history pressed down upon him. 100 years of conquest. 17 civilizations brought to their knees. An empire built on the simple truth that the strong took from the weak. That truth had been proven false. There was a species stronger than the Velrath. There was a species that would not kneel. And that species was demanding surrender. We accept your terms, Xyreth said at last. His voice was barely above a whisper. The Velrath Dominion surrenders to humanity. The liberation of the 17 conquered worlds took 5 years. Human forces, once deployed only for defense, became the vanguard of freedom across the sector. They freed the Caliph, a peaceful species of artists and philosophers who had surrendered without a fight. They freed the Morith, who had once been warriors themselves before the Velrath broke their spirit. They freed species that had forgotten what freedom meant after generations of slavery. Dr. Catherine Webb led the diplomatic mission to the former Dominion territories. She helped establish the first Interstellar Council, with representatives from all the freed worlds. She taught them about democracy and self-governance. She showed them that they did not have to live in fear. Admiral Lisa Morgan retired with full honors after seeing the last Velrath warship dismantled. She returned to her hometown in Montana and spent her remaining years teaching history to young people. She told them about the war and the sacrifices that had been made. She told them about the soldiers who had died so that humanity could remain free. When asked what lesson the war held for the galaxy, she always gave the same answer. Some species conquer. Some species submit. And some species simply refuse to be anything other than free. We are that third kind. We always have been. The story of how humanity answered a demand for tribute spread across the stars. It became legend among the freed peoples. It was told in 100 languages on 1,000 worlds. Parents shared it with their children. Teachers taught it in their classrooms. It became a symbol of hope for any species that faced tyranny the Velrath had come to. Earth with 300 warships and demanded tribute. They had expected surrender. They had expected fear. They had expected to add another name to their list of conquered worlds. Instead, they had received a single word. A word that changed everything. A word that echoed through history like thunder across an empty sky. No, sometimes that is all it takes. Sometimes one word is enough to bring down an empire. Sometimes a species just needs to stand up and say that they will not be taken, that they will not be broken, that they would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. Humanity had said that word, and the galaxy would never be the same.